I turned the truck around without a word and drove straight back to our apartment. The floodwaters had risen to knee-height in the streets, but I'd already made my decision in the 5 seconds it took me to process what I'd seen through the coffee shop window. Emma, my girlfriend of 3 years, loading her suitcase into David Fletcher's BMW, while I'd been wading through contaminated water for the past 2 hours searching for her. The emergency alert had come at 6 a.m. The dam upstream had developed critical structural damage, and our neighborhood was in the primary evacuation zone. I'd called Emma immediately. She was supposed to be at her sister's place across town after working a night shift at the hospital. No answer. I'd driven through increasingly dangerous conditions, checking her apartment, the hospital, every place she might be. The cell networks were overloaded. I'd been genuinely terrified. Then I'd spotted her through the window of Merchant Street Coffee, the only business still open, its owner too stubborn to leave. She hadn't looked distressed. She'd been laughing, actually laughing, as David, her just a colleague from the hospital, carried her designer bag to his car. I parked in the underground garage of our building. The water hadn't reached here yet, but it would within hours according to the emergency broadcast. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and opened the door to the apartment we'd shared for 18 months. I worked methodically. I'd already been planning to propose next month, had the ring hidden in my toolbox in the spare room. But that thought process belonged to a different version of me, one that had existed until approximately 7 minutes ago. First, I changed into dry clothes. Then I pulled out 3 large waterproof storage containers from the hall closet. Into the first went my documents: birth certificate, passport, deed to the small rental property my grandfather had left me, investment statements, my teaching credentials and certifications. Into the second went my laptop. External hard drives containing 6 years of lesson plans and curriculum I'd developed, my camera equipment, and the few pieces of electronics that mattered. Into the third went clothes, my grandfather's watch, and the photo albums from before I'd met Emma. My parents, my college graduation, my hiking trips out west. I specifically left every photograph that included her. Left the framed pictures on the bookshelf, the magnets on the refrigerator, the collage she'd made for our 2nd anniversary. She could keep the memories. I was keeping my future. The apartment lease was in both our names, but I'd been paying 70% of the rent because she was saving for grad school. The furniture was mostly mine, brought from my previous place or inherited from my grandmother. I didn't care. She could have it. I did, however, take a moment to document everything. I photographed each room from multiple angles, time-stamped and geotagged. Then I drafted an email to our landlord. Due to the emergency evacuation and irreconcilable personal circumstances, I am terminating my financial obligation to the lease at 4447 Riverside Drive, Unit 3B, effective immediately. I have documented the current condition of the property. My portion of this month's rent has already been paid. Please coordinate any future matters exclusively with Emma Whitaker regarding this property. I sent it. Then I sent a nearly identical message to the utility companies, the internet provider, the renter's insurance agency. My phone buzzed. Emma. I declined the call and blocked the number. Then I opened a new text message to my department head at Lincoln High School, where I'd been teaching AP History for 4 years. Robert, I'm evacuating as recommended. I may need to relocate temporarily depending on flood damage assessment. I'll keep you updated on my status for Monday's return. All my digital files are backed up on the school server. Professional. Calm. No drama. I loaded the containers into my truck. The water in the street had risen another 3 inches. I had maybe 90 minutes before this route became impassable. One last sweep of the apartment. I wasn't sentimental by nature, but I paused in the spare room that doubled as my office. The walls were covered with maps, historical maps, topographical maps, maps I'd used for lesson plans about westward expansion and the Civil War. I'd always loved maps, loved how they told stories about human decisions and consequences. Emma had always called this room Logan's War Room, half mocking, half affectionate. She'd never understood why I spent hours here, tracing supply routes and battle lines, teaching teenagers to think critically about how terrain shaped history. I left the maps, started fresh. Better metaphor anyway. I took State Route 17 north, away from the flood zone. The highway was clogged with evacuation traffic, but I had a plan. My college roommate, James, owned a small engineering firm in Porterville, about 90 miles north. I'd been the best man at his wedding. We'd stayed close, got together every few months. I called him from the truck. "Logan, you okay? We've been seeing the news about the flooding." "I'm evacuating now. I need a favor. Do you have floor space for a few days while I figure things out?" "Of course, absolutely. Rachel will be thrilled to see you. We've got the guest room ready. But what about Emma? Is she with you?" "No," I said, keeping my voice level. "Emma made other arrangements." There was a pause. James was smart enough to hear what I wasn't saying. "Got it. Doors open, man. Drive safe." I arrived at James and Rachel's place just before noon. They lived in a renovated Craftsman on a quiet street lined with oak trees, the kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors and kids still played outside. Everything the flood zone wasn't. Rachel had lunch ready. Soup and sandwiches, practical and warm. They asked if I wanted to talk about it. I gave them the essential facts in under 2 minutes. Found Emma evacuating with a coworker instead of being where she'd said. Made the decision immediately. Left. "That's it?" Rachel asked. "You're just done?" "When someone shows you who they are in a crisis," I said, "believe them." She chose to lie about her location during an emergency. She chose to leave with someone else while I was searching for her. Those aren't ambiguous actions. James nodded slowly. "That's remarkably rational for something that just happened this morning." "Emotion comes later," I said. "Priority now is logistics." And I meant it. Over the next 3 days, while news helicopters filmed the flooded streets of my former neighborhood, I rebuilt my immediate future. I called my insurance agent and filed a claim for any possessions damaged in the apartment. I contacted my bank and opened a new individual account, transferring my assets out of the joint savings Emma and I had maintained. That account had $4,200 in it. I took exactly half to the dollar and left a paper trail of the withdrawal. I researched rental properties in Porterville. James mentioned that his firm had been growing and they'd been discussing opening a community outreach program, partnering with local schools to promote engineering and critical thinking education. Would I be interested in consulting? Maybe teaching some Saturday workshops? "I'm a history teacher," I pointed out. "You're a teacher who gets teenagers excited about thinking systematically," James corrected. "That's the hard part. The engineering content we can provide." It was better money than my teaching salary, and it would be supplemental. I told him I'd think about it. My phone had been buzzing periodically. I'd set up a new number through my carrier, kept the same phone, new digits, and I'd notified everyone who mattered. Family, close friends, the school, my bank, my doctor. I didn't block Emma on this number. I just never gave it to her. On day 4, the water started receding. On day 5, residents were allowed back to assess damage. I didn't go. Instead, I drove to a real estate office in downtown Porterville. The small house my grandfather had left me was currently rented to a young couple on a month-to-month lease. The property manager said they were actually looking to buy their own place soon. The house needed work, but it was structurally sound, 3 bedrooms, decent neighborhood. If the current tenants leave, I asked, how fast could you turn it over for me to move in? She checked her notes. They've already given notice for the end of next month, actually, with some basic repairs and cleaning. 6 weeks, maybe 7. I authorized the repairs. New paint, deep cleaning, fix the porch railing, update the bathroom fixtures. Nothing extravagant, but make it livable and presentable. Cost would be about $4,000. I had that, especially with the insurance payout coming. The school district in Porterville was smaller than Lincoln High, but they had an opening for a social studies teacher. Their previous hire had relocated for family reasons. I submitted an application. With my credentials and 4 years of solid performance reviews, I got an interview within a week. The interview went well. They were impressed by my curriculum development, my student test scores, my clean record. They offered me the position the next day, starting salary slightly less than my previous job, but cost of living in Porterville was lower, and I'd have the consulting work with James's firm. I accepted. During this first week, I had time to reflect. James and Rachel's guest room had a window that looked out onto their backyard, where their 2 kids played on a swing set every evening. I'd watch them sometimes, thinking about the future I'd been planning with Emma. The house we'd talked about buying. The kids we'd discussed. Having, eventually. All of it had been built on a foundation I'd believed was solid. But foundations cracked when tested. That's what the flood had proven, literally for hundreds of buildings in my old neighborhood, metaphorically for my relationship. I pulled out a notebook and did something I'd learned to do in graduate school when facing complex problems. I made a list, not of emotions or grievances, but of observable facts over the past 3 years. Emma had canceled plans with me 17 times in the last 6 months. I'd canceled twice, both for school emergencies. Emma had consistently downplayed my career, calling teaching noble but not lucrative at dinner parties. Emma had stopped attending faculty events with me after the first year, claiming they were boring. Emma had increasingly mentioned David's name in conversation over the past 4 months. Emma had started going to the gym at different hours than me, saying she preferred evening workouts now. Emma had password-protected her phone 6 months ago, something she'd never done before. Individually, these were small things. I'd rationalized each one. But written out sequentially, they formed a pattern I'd been unwilling to see. The flood hadn't created a problem. It had revealed one. 2 weeks after the flood, I was back at Lincoln High to collect my personal items and process my resignation. The principal, Dr. Martinez, was disappointed but understanding. "You're one of our best," she said, "if the circumstances were different." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I need a fresh start. What happened with the evacuation? It clarified some things." She nodded. "The teaching profession is small, though. If Porterville doesn't work out, you'll have excellent references from us." I shook her hand and left. The building felt like a museum of someone else's life. On my way out, I ran into Keisha, the English teacher whose classroom was next to mine. We'd collaborated on several cross-curricular projects. She'd have her students write historical fiction, while my students researched the actual time periods. It had been effective and popular. "Logan, we heard you were leaving. Is it true?" "Because of Emma." "It's true I'm leaving," I said. "Emma's a factor, but not the only one. Sometimes a catalyst just shows you what you should have seen earlier." "She came by last week," Keisha said carefully. "Looking for you. She seemed upset." "I'm sure she was. She said you abandoned her during the flood, that you left without trying to reach her." I smiled thinly. Interesting narrative. Tell me, Keisha, if someone is genuinely unreachable during an emergency, how do they manage to evacuate comfortably with detailed luggage while you're wading through floodwater searching for them? Keisha's eyes widened. "Oh. Yeah," she touched my arm. "For what it's worth, you always seemed too good for the way she treated you. We noticed. The way she'd show up here and expect you to drop everything. How she'd talk down about your hobbies in front of people. How she'd roll her eyes when you got excited about a new curriculum idea. We just thought you didn't see it." "I saw it," I said quietly. "I just didn't want to believe it mattered. Turns out, crisis situations have a way of forcing clarity." "Well, Porterville's lucky to get you. And whoever you end up with next will be too, as long as they're smart enough to appreciate what they have." I moved into my grandfather's house exactly 7 weeks after the flood. The renovations had come in under budget and ahead of schedule. The place wasn't large, 1,200 square feet, but it was mine, truly mine, with no shared leases or combined names on utility bills. The house sat on a corner lot with a large oak tree in the front yard and a small garden area in the back that was overgrown but had potential. My grandfather had built a workshop in the garage before he died, and while the tools were outdated, the space was functional. I spent the first weekend just cleaning and organizing, making the space feel like mine. I set up my office in the second bedroom. Maps went back on the walls, but this time I added new ones. Topographical maps of the areas around Porterville, hiking trails in the nearby state park, a large map of the western United States with pins marking places I wanted to visit. The third bedroom became a dedicated reading room and library. I'd always collected history books, first editions when I could afford them, and they'd been in boxes at Emma's request to declutter our previous apartment. They came out now, organized by period and region, properly displayed on shelves I built myself over a weekend. There was something therapeutic about the physical work. Measuring, cutting, sanding, assembling, creating something solid and permanent with my own hands. My grandfather had taught me basic carpentry when I was young, but Emma had never been interested in home improvement projects. "Why bother when we can just hire someone?" she'd say. But I'd missed this. Missed the satisfaction of building something myself. My first day at Porterville High was in late September, just as the leaves were starting to turn. The school was smaller, about 600 students total, but the faculty was dedicated, and the students were engaged. My second period AP-US history class had 18 students, all genuinely interested, all willing to do the work. I introduced myself simply. "I'm Mr. Durant. I'm here to teach you how to think about history, not just memorize it. History is about causation, about understanding why people made the decisions they made with the information they had. We're going to look at primary sources, we're going to debate, and we're going to understand that every event we study was once somebody's present-day crisis." They responded well. Better than well, actually. By October, I had students staying after class to continue discussions, asking for reading recommendations, treating the subject like it mattered. One student in particular, a senior named Brian, who was planning to study engineering, approached me after class one day. "Mr. Durant, this might sound weird, but the way you explain historical decisions, looking at constraints and available information and probable outcomes, it's exactly how my dad talks about engineering problems." "History and engineering aren't that different," I said. "Both are about solving problems with incomplete information and imperfect solutions. Both require understanding that every choice has consequences." "That's what my dad says. He works for Riverside Engineering. Do you know them?" "James Riverside is actually a friend of mine. That's his company. Brian's eyes lit up. No way. Would you maybe be willing to talk to him about me? I've applied for their summer internship program, but it's competitive. I made a note. I'll mention you, but, Brian, you'll get it on your own merits. Your analytical thinking is strong. I've seen it in your essays. He got the internship. James called me in December to tell me that Brian was exactly the kind of student they were hoping to attract, and it was conversations like that which solidified the consulting arrangement. The consulting work with James's firm started officially in November. 2 Saturdays a month, I taught workshops for high school students interested in engineering or architecture. Not the technical skills, but the critical thinking, the historical context of why cities were built certain ways, how infrastructure decisions had long-term consequences. The first workshop, I brought in case studies, the decision to build New Orleans below sea level, the Chicago fire and its impact on building codes, the Johnstown flood and dam safety regulations. I had 15 students, and we spent 3 hours analyzing decisions, discussing risk assessment, understanding that engineering wasn't just mathematics but human judgment applied to physical constraints. The kids loved it. More importantly, they got it. They started seeing engineering not as abstract problem-solving, but as real decisions with real impacts on real people. James sat in on the second workshop. Afterward, he pulled me aside. Logan, this is exactly what we hoped for, but better. You're teaching them to think like engineers before they know any engineering. That's the foundation we can't usually build until junior year of college, and you're giving it to them in high school. It's not that different from teaching history, I said. Just applied to physical systems instead of human systems. It's more valuable than you realize. I want to expand this. 4 workshops a month instead of 2, and I want to pay you a proper consulting rate. The money was good. Very good. By December, I'd paid off my truck and started building a genuine savings account. More than that, I'd found a rhythm. Teaching during the week, consulting on weekends, and having time for myself that I'd never had before. I also started hiking seriously. The state park near Porterville had extensive trails, and I'd never had time for them before. Emma had always wanted to spend weekends at wineries or shopping, activities that drained my wallet and my energy. Now I spent Saturday afternoons on mountain trails with a backpack and a camera, photographing landscapes and wildlife, thinking clearly in ways I hadn't in years. The physical activity helped too. I'd let myself go a bit during the relationship. Nothing dramatic, but 20 pounds heavier than I wanted to be. The hiking took care of that. By January, I was in the best shape I'd been since college, and I felt it. More energy, better sleep, clearer thinking. I met someone on one of those hikes in January. Her name was Natalie. She was a photographer for the Regional Tourism Board, and we quite literally bumped into each other at a scenic overlook when I backed up to frame a shot of the valley below. Sorry, I said immediately. Wasn't paying attention to my surroundings. No harm done. That's actually a great spot. You'll want to wait about 10 more minutes for the light to hit those ridges perfectly. She was right. We talked while waiting, compared cameras, discussed favorite trails. She was professional, competent, had an easy laugh, and a direct way of speaking that reminded me of nothing from my previous relationship, which was exactly what I needed. Before we parted, she mentioned that the tourism board was looking for content for their educational materials, historical context for the various sites, stories about the area's role in the gold rush and later lumber industry. Would you be interested in consulting on that? She asked. Paid work, of course. We're trying to make our materials more comprehensive, less just pretty pictures and more substance. I took her card. I'll think about it. Did consult on it, and it turned into a regular freelance arrangement. Extra income, creative outlet, and a way to combine my love of history with the outdoor activities I'd grown to value. The tourism board wanted brochures, website content, educational materials for schools. I researched local history, interviewed longtime residents, dug through county archives. It was fascinating work. I learned about the area's indigenous history, the impact of the gold rush, the evolution of the logging industry, the development of the state park system. Material I could use in my teaching, stories I could tell my students to make history feel local and relevant. Natalie and I became friends, just friends initially. We'd grab coffee after planning meetings, talk about books and photography, and the complexities of making history accessible to general audiences. She knew I'd gone through a difficult breakup, didn't press for details, respected my privacy. In February, I ran into Emma's sister, Michelle, at a grocery store in what should have been a neutral territory, halfway between Porterville and my old town. She saw me first. Logan? Michelle. We stood there awkwardly in the produce section. Michelle had always been kind to me, one of the few members of Emma's family I'd genuinely liked. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm well. You?" "I'm okay. Logan, I need to tell you something. Emma lied to me too. About where she was that night before the flood. She told me she was at my place if you asked, but she never showed up. I didn't know until afterward that she'd used me as an alibi." "I figured that out," I said. "I'm sorry. I would have told you earlier, but I didn't have your new number. She's not doing well." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" Michelle asked, not unkindly. "Because honestly, Logan, you seem fine. Better than fine, actually. You look healthier than I've ever seen you." "I am healthier. Hiking regularly, sleeping better, less stress." She nodded slowly. "Emma said you were heartless for leaving, but I've been thinking about it, and I don't think that's true. I think you just knew your worth." "Something like that. For what it's worth, I always thought you were too good for her. The way she talked about you sometimes, like you were convenient but not exciting. You deserved better." "I found better. Better life, anyway." Michelle smiled. "Good, I'm glad. And Logan, don't feel guilty about being happy. You earned it." In March, almost exactly 9 months after the flood, I ran into Emma herself. I was at a regional education conference in the state capital, presenting on cross-curricular teaching strategies. The presentation was called History Meets Engineering, Teaching Critical Thinking Across Disciplines. And it drew a surprisingly large crowd, about 60 educators from across the state. Emma was there too. Apparently, she'd finally started the graduate nursing program she'd been saving for, and the program required attendance at this particular conference for some healthcare education component. She saw me first. I was walking out of my presentation session, riding the high of having delivered a well-received talk, when I heard my name. "Logan." I turned. She looked different, thinner, tired, her hair shorter than I remembered. She was alone. "Emma," I said neutrally. "I've been trying to reach you. Your number doesn't work." I changed it. "Obviously, Logan, we need to talk. About what happened, about the flood and everything after." I glanced at my watch. "I have another session in 20 minutes. Then spare me 10, please." We sat in a quiet corner of the conference center lobby. She immediately started talking, the words coming fast, defensive. "You left me, Logan, during an emergency. I was terrified, and you just disappeared. You took half our money, you abandoned the apartment, you didn't even give me a chance to explain." I let her finish. Then I said calmly, "Tell me exactly where you were when the evacuation order came through." She hesitated. "I was at David's place. I'd stayed there after my shift because I was too tired to drive." "You told me you were at your sister's." "I didn't want you to worry, so you lied about your location during an emergency evacuation situation. Then you loaded your suitcase into David's car and evacuated with him while I spent 2 hours searching for you in dangerous conditions. It wasn't like that. What was it like then? She struggled for words. David and we'd become close. He was going through a divorce, and I was confused about us, about you and me, and I thought maybe some distance would help me figure things out. Distance would have been honest communication. Logan, I'm struggling with our relationship. I need space. That's distance. What you did was deception. I was going to tell you. I just needed time. You had time. You had the entire drive out of the flood zone. You could have called me from David's car. You didn't. She looked down. I know, I messed up. But Logan, these past months have been awful. David and I didn't work out. He reconciled with his wife. I had to cover the full rent on the apartment by myself, then move because I couldn't afford it. I had to delay starting grad school because my finances fell apart. My sister won't talk to me because I lied to her too, used her as an alibi. I've been completely alone. Those are consequences, I said. Natural results of your choices. God, you sound like a teacher. There was bitterness in her voice now. I am a teacher. I teach about cause and effect, about how decisions made in critical moments reveal character. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Doesn't that matter? I considered the question seriously. It matters that you're sorry. It doesn't change my decision. Emma, in the moment when it mattered most, when there was actual danger and real stakes, you chose deception. You chose someone else. Those aren't ambiguous actions. People make mistakes in relationships. This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are accidental. You made a series of deliberate choices to lie about where you were, to stay with David, to leave with him, to not contact me. Each one was a decision point where you could have chosen differently. She was crying now. So that's it? You just wrote me off? Moved on like I meant nothing? You meant a great deal to me. That's why it hurt. But pain doesn't obligate me to accept unacceptable behavior. I didn't write you off. You wrote yourself out of my life through your actions. You seem to be doing fine without me, she said, and now the bitterness was unmistakable. New job, new town, giving presentations at conferences. I heard you're even dating someone. I'm not, actually, but if I were, that would be my business. We've been broken up for 9 months, Emma. You don't have standing to comment on my life anymore. She wiped her eyes. Do you hate me? No. I don't feel strongly enough about you to hate you. I'm indifferent, Emma. You're someone I used to know who made choices I couldn't respect, that's all. I stood up. I genuinely hope you get your life together. I hope grad school works out. But I won't be part of your journey, and you won't be part of mine. Take care of yourself. I walked away. She didn't follow. That evening, I called Natalie. We'd been dancing around the edge of something more than friendship for weeks now, both of us cautious, both aware that timing mattered. How was the conference? She asked. Educational. I ran into my ex. Oh, how did that go? Definitively. It confirmed I made the right choice. There was a pause. Logan, are you free for dinner tomorrow? Actual dinner, not just coffee. I'd like to take you to that Italian place downtown. Are you asking me on a date, Natalie? I am. Clearly and unambiguously. Yes or no? I smiled. Yes. We dated carefully, intelligently, with the patience of people who'd both been burned and learned from it. Natalie was independent, had her own career and interests, respected boundaries, communicated directly. When she couldn't make plans, she said so explicitly and suggested alternatives. When something bothered her, she brought it up immediately instead of letting it fester. When I told her about Emma, she listened without judgment, and then said simply, "You handled that well. Clean break, clear boundaries. That's healthy. In June, a year after the flood, she asked if I wanted to go to Colorado with her for a photography assignment. She'd be working during the days, but I could hike and explore, and we'd have the evenings together. I said yes. We stood at the edge of Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs, watching the sunset paint the red rocks in shades of copper and gold. Natalie was taking photos, completely absorbed in her work. I was simply present, appreciating the moment, the location, the company. "You're different than when I met you," Natalie said, lowering her camera. "More settled, more yourself." I had some dead weight to cut loose. The ex? Among other things. Mostly expectations that weren't mine, ways of living that didn't fit. She nodded. "I was married before. Did I tell you that?" "You mentioned it briefly." "He was controlling. Wanted me to give up photography, said it was a hobby, not a career. Took me 3 years to leave. I stayed because I thought loyalty meant enduring. Turns out loyalty to yourself matters more." Smart woman. Smart enough to recognize a good thing when I see it. She kissed me, brief and sweet. "Thank you for being patient with me, with us. Thank you for being worth being patient for." We flew back to Porterville. Life continued its steady, satisfying rhythm. My second year at Porterville High was even better than the first. I had a reputation now. Students actively requested my classes. The AP test scores from my first year had been exceptional, and the school board had noticed. James's firm expanded the educational outreach program significantly. We added workshops on urban planning, environmental engineering, sustainable design. I brought in guest speakers, organized field trips to local engineering projects, created curriculum materials that other districts started requesting. The firm brought me on as a part-time staff member with benefits and a proper title, Director of Educational Outreach. The tourism board work continued and evolved. They asked me to lead historical walking tours during the summer months. Paid well, flexible schedule, chance to meet interesting people. I developed a signature tour called Reading the Landscape: How Geography Shaped Local History, which became popular with both tourists and school groups. I bought a better camera with some of the consulting income. Adopted a dog from the local shelter, a rescue lab mix named Cooper, who loved hiking as much as I did. Renovated the basement into a proper workshop where I could build furniture and restore old maps, a hobby that turned into a small side business when people started commissioning custom pieces. My house appreciated in value. My retirement accounts grew. My relationships deepened. I lived a life that was genuinely, authentically mine. In October, almost 18 months after the flood, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "I owe you this." I almost deleted it. Curiosity won. "Logan, this is Emma. I'm using a new email because I figured you blocked my old one. You don't have to respond. Actually, please don't respond. I just needed to say this. You were right about all of it. I made deliberate choices during the flood, and I made them because I was selfish and cowardly and didn't want to face the reality that I'd been treating you poorly for a long time. David was an escape, a fantasy, and I chose that over someone who genuinely cared about me. The consequences you mentioned? They were worse than you know. I failed out of grad school the first semester because I couldn't focus. I moved back in with my parents. I'm in therapy now, trying to understand why I sabotage good things. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. You've clearly moved on, and you should. I just wanted you to know that you were right to leave. You deserved better than what I gave you. I hope you're happy. Sincerely, Emma." I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk with Cooper. Natalie came over that evening. We cooked dinner together, She made her grandmother's pasta recipe while I prepared a salad and garlic bread. We'd fallen into this comfortable rhythm of shared domesticity, neither of us rushing toward anything, both of us appreciating what we were building. "You seem thoughtful," she observed. "Emma sent an apology email today. First contact since the conference. How do you feel about that?" Neutral, maybe slightly relieved that she figured it out. Mostly just glad I'm here instead of there. "Here is pretty good," Natalie agreed, leaning against me. "Here is excellent." And it was. The flood had destroyed a neighborhood, damaged hundreds of homes, displaced thousands of people. The economic impact had been in the tens of millions. People had lost everything. For me, it had been a clarifying moment, the exact point where one version of my life ended and a better one began. I'd lost an apartment, a relationship, a comfortable routine. I'd gained clarity, self-respect, a career I was proud of, multiple income streams, friendships that mattered, and eventually someone who saw me clearly and chose me anyway. The math wasn't complicated. The cost-benefit analysis was obvious. I'd made the right choice the moment I turned that truck around in the floodwater. Everything that followed was simply proof.